What did your mother teach you about being self-interested? It's bad. You know, that's the worst thing you can say to somebody. They're being selfish. You know what caused the great financial crisis? Wall Street greed. You know, in 2007, there was an epidemic of greed. If the government didn't inspect elevators, elevator companies would build elevators that fell and killed people, because the best way to make money in capitalism is to kill your customers. We are the being that doesn't accommodate our life to the environment. We are the being that changes the environment to fit our life.
Dr. Yaron Brook, the chairman of the Ayn Rand Institute, hosts The Yaron Brook Show and has co-authored best-selling books including Free Market Revolution and Equal is Unfair. Born in Israel, he later earned a PhD in finance in the US, taught at Santa Clara University, and co-founded BH Equity Research. He's a prominent voice in economic circles and has contributed to major publications such as the Wall Street Journal. So let's all give a round of applause to Yaron and welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to speak here at the IEA. It's a real pleasure. So, morality of capitalism. Morality and capitalism, right? People are bewildered by this combination, right? I think in this group we all understand and we all know that capitalism works. That in a sense of achieving economic success, of achieving human flourishing as an economic system, capitalism works. Usually I have to spend like half the talk proving that, or at least indicating to people that that is the case. I think here I can just say that. It works. The challenge that we all have in advocating for capitalism, the challenge we have in the fact that people reject capitalism, is their perception of capitalism as immoral, in spite of the fact that they all know deep down that it works. I mean, even Elizabeth Warren, I assume you all know who Elizabeth Warren is, a very, very bad leftist politician in the United States, even she calls herself a capitalist because she wants to attach to the perception that it is good. So that it works, right? But she wants to make it more moral. So what is it about morality is the real question that we have to ask ourselves that causes people to think that capitalism is immoral. What is it about morality that leads them to constantly undermine whatever economic freedom we have? And it's constant. What is it about morality that leads them to blame every single crisis, every single one in economics on capitalism? And they always do. And, you know, if you want to ask me about particular crises in the Q&A, feel free to do so. Well, what is capitalism about? What at the end of the day is capitalism facilitate in terms of human action, in terms of human activity? Right? So when we go out into the marketplace, what are we actually doing? What are we doing? We're trading. Why? Why do we trade? For what purpose do markets exist? When, you know, Steve Jobs, right? I use my iPhone in most of my talks, makes one of these. Who is he making it for? Why does he build an iPhone? To make money, right? I mean, you can tell this is a slightly different group because usually it takes about, you know, a few hesitation and umming and ahhing before somebody will actually say to make money, but he's doing it to make money. And is it only about money? I mean, most of you go to work to make money, but you don't only want to make money. What else? Why else do you go to work? To provide a product, service? What really? Why do you go to work?
Money.
We said that one.
Personally satisfied.
Yeah, it's fun. Hopefully, it's challenging. It's a place in which we attain much of our self-esteem because we challenge ourselves, we push ourselves, we do interesting work. Steve Jobs certainly didn't get up every morning thinking, I want to go make money. He said, I want to go make beautiful products that I imagine are possible. I want to have fun designing and building and making and producing. So work, hopefully, should be fun. should be interesting, should be challenging. So at the end of the day, Steve Jobs builds this for Steve because he loves it and because he made billions and billions of dollars from this. I remember going and buying my first iPhone. It was 2008. U.S. economy was going to recession. I'd read by Keynes, and I knew that the way to get the economy out of recession was to go consume. Consumption drives economic growth, right? We all know that. So I went to buy my iPhone because I wanted to help the U.S. economy, sustain people's jobs, right? That's why you guys shopping, right? You want to help your fellow man? Why do you go shopping? Because you want it, right? Because you think it'll improve your own life. You intend it to improve your own life. You're pursuing your own, what? Self-interest. Yeah, self-interest. So here you have a marketplace where people are trading for the purpose of their own self-interest. All markets are like this. All transactions in a marketplace are like this. Right? People might not know what their self-interest is. People might make mistakes, but their intention is the pursuit of some form of satisfaction for themselves. It's self-interested activity. Now, what did your mother teach you about being self-interested?
It's bad.
It's bad. I know what my mother taught me, right? Think of yourself last. Be self-less. Selfishness is what we call the nasty kid, the really bad kid. That's the worst thing you can say to somebody. They're being selfish. So capitalism is obviously self-interested. People go out there and pursue, in one form or another, what is perceived to be their self-interest. Money, success, achievement, producing the values they want to produce. We all go to consume stuff because we want to consume it, because it's good for ourselves. And we live in a society where self-interest is viewed as a negative, as morally evil, as the thing you're supposed not to do, as the thing our mothers, preachers, philosophers have taught us is the essence of immorality. System that encourages self-interest versus a morality that says it's evil. Well, the system must be crooked. There's no way a system that encourages, rewards, incentivizes self-interested behavior is going to be a moral system from that perspective. What is noble? What is good in our culture? If it's not self-interest, what is it? It's sacrifice for other people, or for trees, or for, something, Mother Earth, whatever it happens to be. The essence is selflessness and sacrificing for some other out there. And, the statists are very, very good at encouraging you to sacrifice and blaming all the problems on that which is self-interested, that which is motivated. What caused the great financial crisis? Wall Street greed. In 2007, there was an epidemic of greed. It didn't exist in 2006 or 5 or 4. It just, Wall Street just went berserk with greed suddenly. Bizarre, right? But it's an easy solution. To this day, most people think that the financial crisis was caused by Wall Street greed. If you want to know what caused the financial crisis, ask me later. It wasn't Wall Street greed. So we have an ethical system that pretty much everybody accepts, no matter what your politics are, no matter what theory of economics you adhere to. Almost everybody accepts that in morality, the truth is sacrifice is noble and self-interest is a vice. And that makes capitalism, basically not palatable. It makes capitalism immoral. And therefore, when we deviate from it a little bit, we almost always deviate from it a little bit in order to try to squeeze in a little bit of morality into it. Right? Why do we have a welfare state? Not because it economically makes any sense. Nobody believes that, really. Why do we have a welfare state? Because there were some poor people, right? I mean, really poor. And there were rich people over here. And the rich people were not helping the poor people as much as morality would demand of them. Sacrifice, remember? You're supposed to sacrifice for those in need. So the state came in and said, here's the deal. You can stop feeling guilty about not helping those people. We'll do it for you. We'll just tax you a little bit, or a lot, as the case may be. And we'll do the redistribution for you. You know you should be doing it yourself. And most wealthy people went, oh, okay, that's good. You know, when California raised the income tax just at the state level, right, from 10% to 13%, about 15 years ago. And, people making $1 million or more. How do you think of people making $1 million or more voted? They all voted for it. There's, again, a way to reduce their guilt and a way to let the state do the redistribution that they believe morally that they had a duty to do, because that's what would make them a good person. Why don't we have a regulatory state? Again, think about morality. If you leave businesses alone unregulated, as some of us in this room believe they should be, well, they're self-interested. But what do we believe about self-interest? What will we be taught about self-interest? It's bad, but how does that manifest itself? How does the badness of self-interest manifest itself in behavior? What would self-interested people actually do? Harm others. Lie, steal, cheat, stab people in the back, do whatever it takes, right? Because that's the perception most people have of a self-interested person. Businessmen self-interested people lie, steal, cheat, and backstab. Oh, businessmen must be people who lie, steal, cheat, backstab. Just logic. And we need to stop them. How do we stop them? We regulate them. If we leave them free, they will do all these things. So we need to control them. Right? You know how I often use this? I don't know if this is true in the UK, but I assume it does. In the US, you walk into an elevator, any elevator in a building, and there's a little diploma on the wall, and it says, a government inspector has inspected this elevator, it won't fall and kill you. And I go, whew, I'm so glad. Because I know that if the government didn't inspect elevators, elevator companies would build elevators that fell and killed people, because the best way to make money in capitalism is to kill your customers. But you laugh, but that's the assumption. We have food inspectors because they would poison us. We have drug inspectors because drug companies would sell us drugs that kill us. We have elevator inspectors because elevators would drop out of the sky and kill us all. Nothing would function if not for the government regulator coming in and making sure we didn't get harmed. Because the assumption is selfish, self-interested businessmen will harm their customers, will harm anybody they interact with. That's morality. It's not business, not reality. It's not facts. It's not evidence in history, although they rewrite the history to pretend that it is that way. That is morality dictating politics, dictating economic policy, dictating. So we have a regulatory state and we have a welfare state because we have a morality that says self-interest is evil and you must sacrifice. And at the end of the day, what political system is consistent with sacrifice? Not capitalism. Of what political system is consistent with you don't matter as an individual. What matters is others, other-focused. Yeah, any form of socialism, any form of statism, really. You know, communism, it's to the proletarian. Socialism, it's to the other, the poor. Fascism, it's to the state. But it's always something above and beyond you. You know how politicians tell you have to strive for something above and beyond yourself, right? Yeah, you got to sacrifice for the thing that they have pointed out is more important than you. And that's always statism, and it's always from the top down, and it's always dictatorial in one form or another. Our politics and our economics are driven by ethical theory. They're not driven by history or economic theory. They're driven by ethics. They're shaped by ethics. So we're stuck. As long as we hold a morality that says self-interest is rotten and selflessness, not caring about self, not working for oneself. Maybe we allow a little bit of, taking care of self so you can stay alive for a while. But really, the focus is on sacrifice, right? Capitalism can never be viewed as moral and therefore will never be embraced. And here's the big challenge. The challenge, I think, that the people who believe in free markets really struggle with. And that is, it's time we rethought morality. It's time we rethought our ethics. We know what the outcome, and we like the outcome, the human flourishing outcome, the wealth outcome, the success outcome that capitalism delivers. Why don't we start asking the question of, why should I sacrifice? Why be selfless? Why are other lives and other people's happiness more important than mine? I mean, from my perspective, mine's more important than you guys. To me, isn't that true of every one of us? Shouldn't it be true of every one of us? Isn't our lives the most sacred thing we have? Isn't our life the ultimate purpose of life is to live it? I like to say live it with a capital L, big live it, right? Really live it. Ayn Rand asked that question. She says, why sacrifice? Why live for others? And there's really no answer other than somebody said so.
Oh, Jesus.
He really did start it all, didn't he? Yeah. Certainly religion says so, right? Religion says so. Religion says sacrifice to a God. Religion says sacrifice to a community, to the poor, to whatever. It's all about sacrifice. It's not about. It's interesting because you have an ideal of morality as Mother Teresa, right? Who's all about sacrifice and suffering. And if you don't believe she suffered, read Christopher Hitchens' book on Mother Teresa. It's brilliant. She didn't like what she was doing. She did it out of a sense of duty. But it's that sense of duty that is about sacrifice and otherism and not taking into account one's own life. Suran questions that and challenges that. And I think provides us with an alternative. A morality of self-interest. A code of morality that is guided by your own life, your own success at living, at flourishing, at succeeding at the thing that is life. Because we're not automatically born with the knowledge of how to live. Right? I mean, look around this room. As an animal, you can look. I know. You're really shy. It's a pathetic group. You guys are slow. You guys are weak. I don't see anybody with claws or fangs. I mean, you go out there into nature and try to conquer it just with brute force. Can't do it. You can't even run down a deer. I mean, no wonder we started out picking berries and eating nuts. That's about all we could do. Saber-toothed tiger, human being, you'd think the saber-toothed tiger would win. And on one-on-one, they probably do. But why don't they? Last time I saw a saber-toothed tiger was in a museum, Natural History Museum, right? Last time I saw a human, you guys are all here. How did we win against a saber-toothed tiger? How do we win against a deer? How do we get food? How do we get the things, the basic things that we require to eat? It's not encoded in our genes. We don't have encoded in our genes a methodology of defeating a saber-toothed tiger or how to grow wheat. Anybody have the wheat growing gene? Or the hunting gene? A lot of guys will raise their hand when I say hunting gene. And then, I always challenge to drop them into the Amazon forest and see what happens. What is it that makes it possible for us to achieve all these things? To grow agriculture, to hunt, to produce food at scale, to do, look at this. Look at everything in this room. Every human product in this room. What makes it all possible?
Innovation.
Yeah, but where does innovation come from? Knowledge. Where does knowledge come from? What do we have to do in order to gain innovation and knowledge? What's that? Curiosity is definitely part of it. But no, it's not even self-interest. What do you have before all that? What do you have to do? It's the most basic simple thing. And you have to think. You have to use your mind. You have to look at the world, acknowledge the facts, integrate them, conceptualize them, come up with ideas, creativity, come up with ideas on how to reshape the world out there. And that's what we do. We change our environment, right? We reshape the environment. That's what makes, by the way, environmentalism such a fundamentally corrupt idea. We are the being that doesn't accommodate our life to the environment. We are the being that changes the environment to fit our life from the beginning. We chop down trees to build huts. We blow up mountains to build concrete buildings or brick buildings. We change. We chop down trees and make agriculture. We change the environment to fit our needs. It gets hot. What do we do when it gets really hot? And we're free and we have the capacity to think. What do? Yeah, we have air conditioning. I know you guys in UK don't believe in air conditioning, but some of us who live in warmer climates do. You turn on the air conditioning. It's like let's get in panic because it's going to get hot, And if the sea rises, what do? What did they do in Amsterdam? Sea didn't even have to rise, and they decided they wanted more land, so they built a dike. And all of the Netherlands is below sea level, most of it, right below sea level. Okay, so what? We're all thriving. We are the being that changes the environment to fit our needs based on the use of our mind, based on reason. We are the rational animal. Aristotle knew that, but that was lost for a long, long time. We are the rational animal. So if you want to be self-interested, if you want to build a morality around self-interest, what is in our self-interest? What is in the self-interest of every individual? Well, it's to take the one thing that makes us human, the one thing that produces all these values, and to commit yourself to it. So if you had to boil down Ayn Rand's morality of self-interest, it's think, use your reason, figure stuff out, figure out how to live the best life that you can live. And that is never going to produce a result that says, lie, steal, cheat, use violence against others. It's just not a good way to live. It's a primitive, horrible, disastrous way to live. If you're really self-interested, you want to produce and create, and you want to trade. One of the reasons I despise tariffs and the current talk about trade is that trade is the most beautiful thing we do. It's this amazing thing where we produce something, and then in a win-win transaction with somebody else, we get better, and what happens to them? They get worse? No, they get better too. They get better too. I buy an iPhone for $1,000 because it's worth how much to me? A lot more than $1,000. And Apple, they have a 50% profit margin. They made a profit, and I made a profit. It's just not, can't measure it in dollars. I mean, you can probably, but it's not really, right? I love to use the example. I used it in a school the other day of J.K. Rowling. People upset about inequality. And I say, J.K. Rowling is responsible for a lot of the inequality we see in the world today. I mean, it's horrible. I know I have two sons. They're both about Harry Potter's age. And so I had to buy 2 copies of every book when it came out. At midnight, stand in line, get the books, right? 2 copies. And then I would want to listen to them. So I bought audio tapes in those days, audio. And then every movie that came out, what were they, 25 movies? I mean, it was something ridiculous. And then there were rides in Disneyland. So I spent thousands of dollars on Harry Potter. So I'm poor by thousands of dollars, and she became a billionaire. Like, isn't inequality horrible? Like, I lost, she won? And the kids look at me and say, no, you didn't lose. Really? Why? What happened? You enjoyed reading the books. Yeah. Win-win. So she got rich off of me and all of you enjoying these wonderful books. Now extrapolate that to every billionaire, or most of them, out there. And suddenly you get a completely different realization of businessmen, of billionaires, of what they do. So trade is this beautiful thing where win-win. We both benefit. So Rand actually provides us with a morality that's consistent with capitalism. A morality that says Individuals should pursue their own long-term rational self-interest. They should live their lives for the purpose of living the best life that they can. They should pursue their rational values. And in order to be able to pursue your rational values, and in order to be able to use your mind freely, what do you need? Freedom. You need freedom. And what is capitalism? At the end of the day, what is capitalism? It's the system of freedom. It's a system that extracts violence, extracts force from society, and leaves us free. So why is capitalism a moral system? Because it leaves us free as individuals to pursue our own values, using our own minds, with no coercion, no force, no authority to impose its will on us. But to really, convince the world out there that capitalism is moral, we have to do the heavy lifting. And the heavy lifting is to challenge their morality. This is why it's so hard. This is why we're not just taking off as a capitalist movement. It's because they get tugged back down by their morality. So if we want to make the real change, we need to read Ayn Rand, and we need to challenge morality and propose an alternative. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. That was absolutely brilliant. I love the passion that you have. And it serves as a real reminder that as classical liberals, we're not all about increasing GDP by X or making your house cheaper. There's a fundamental moral reason why we believe in free people and a free society. And I guess that kind of ties into my first question.
I'm all for, but
we have
GDP, maximizing GDP and lowering housing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess that kind of ties into my first question, which is that is a lot of what free market think tanks do. When we want to try and get out and spread this message to the public, we talk about building more houses so we can bring down your rent, by getting rid of trade tariffs so that you can buy cheaper goods.
Yeah.
Do you still think this is a tactic that we should be going for? Or do you think we should be making the more fundamental moral argument a lot more all the time? Or do you think that's maybe going to
Well, I think you need to do both. But there's no question that without the fundamental argument, we will lose, and we are losing, right? I mean, who would have thought that in the 21st century, people would be talking about tariffs seriously and coming up with bizarre excuses, and even people who supposedly support free markets claiming that tariffs somehow help you. It just shows how much we failed. You could make the argument quite easily about minimum wage. Let's say minimum wage is incredibly destructive. It hurts the people you're trying to help. It hurts the poorest of the poor, right? Maybe it helps a certain layer of the poor, but the layers below it hurts them. Like teenage minority kids in the U.S. are really hurt by minimum wages, right? And you can make that argument, and you can draw the graphs, and you can show supply and demand. It's pretty straightforward. It's not really that complicated economically. And all the kids will take the exam, and they'll all get the answer right. And then at the end, you'll ask them, are you for or against minimum wage? And everybody would be for it. And I've run this experiment, right, in economics class. So if we don't deal with the more fundamental, then we're bound to lose. And I think one of the saddest thing of the kind of free market classical liberal movement is the fact that its many economic giants did not take Ayn Rand's philosophy seriously, and were not willing to kind of embrace a much more fundamental, ethical, moral, philosophical defense of capitalism, and stuck to kind of, it works, over and over again. I mean, Milton Friedman's videos are brilliant. I don't know if you see them once in a while on YouTube. Like he's brilliant at explaining these simple things. And, nobody, and he had a huge audience. And yet it hasn't made a dent. I mean, we're seeing it right now where the world is becoming more statist, and where the right, which used to be a little bit, at least in words, pro-free markets, is turned completely against free markets. And there's basically, in the West, with one exception, in the Western world today, there's no political party that is actually pro-free markets. What's the one exception? Argentina, it's Milei. But that's it. There's absolutely, You don't have anybody here in the UK. We certainly don't have anybody in the US. Europe doesn't have a political party that is pro-free markets because these are fundamental issues that unless we challenge them, we lose.
Fantastic. And I think, if someone looks you up on Wikipedia, something I always find kind of interesting is that you are the son of two socialists. I'm kind of curious to know, how did that go down when you told them that you're an objectivist or a libertarian?
Yeah, my parents were initially socialist, but as most socialists of that era, I think, I don't know if there are any socialists today, but the socialists of that era basically became disenchanted. They realized socialism doesn't work, and they became cynical. So most socialists of that era became cynics. They abandoned their socialism as a principle. Certainly my parents did. I know they when they immigrated to Israel, they wanted to go live in a kibbutz. They never did. But then you just look around and you see it doesn't work. It's a disaster everywhere it's tried. Now you don't embrace the alternative because that's immoral. That would it doesn't jive with what's right and what's good and what's fair. So you embrace a kind of cynical attitude towards life, and that's the mixed economy. And the mixed economy is a product of cynicism. Yeah, we want, we have this golden goose that lays golden eggs. We don't want to kill it. So you give them just enough freedom, these businessmen, just enough freedom so they can make the stuff that we all like to buy and we can tax them, but not too much freedom, right? Just a little bit, just enough. And that's just, it's not even ideological anymore. It's just cynicism.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that people always go for this mixed economy thing of, oh yeah, it's fantastic, but you have to just blend it with a little bit of bad stuff to make it somehow better.
Yes.
It's kind of an interesting way of looking at it. Well, we're going to be opening up to Q&A from the audience because I'm sure there's a lot of
let me just drink a power.
Sorry, no, go on.
I mean, basically, it's the mixed economy of the soul, right? It's a mixed economy of morality. Nobody out there, no moral philosopher, even, what's his name, the Australian, the effective altruist Australian. Anyway, no philosopher is going to tell you should sacrifice all day long, never think of yourself, only think of other people. No. Peter Singer, thank you. Peter Singer will not say that, right? What they'll say is, look, you got to take care of yourself. You got to live. You got to survive somehow. And you got to make a little bit of money to help other people, right? You've got to be successful so you can help other people. Indeed, maybe you should choose your profession based on where you can make the most money so you can give it away. You know who advocated for that idea, who actually followed through on that idea? A well-known...
Some random breed.
Yes, SMF, right? The guy who was, the crypto guy who's in jail now for fraud, he was committed to this idea that he was going to make a fortune, but the purpose of that fortune was to give it away. Now, in the meantime, he also, bought some nice things for himself. And also bought some politicians, it turns out. But
You look up.
yeah, but it's so they all tell you got to do a little self-interest. You should feel guilty about the self-interested things you do. That's okay. But you can't give up on that completely because the world will fall apart. They all know that. They all know that without the self-interest, economists talks about incentives. We all need the proper incentives, right? But it's not because you should have the proper incentives because it's your life and you should live it to the full. It's because if you have the proper incentives, you'll maximize GDP and they can tax it more, and as a collective, as a totality will be. But I mean, even Adam Smith, who tells us that the baker doesn't bake the bread for you, he bakes the bread because he's trying to make a living for himself, says that the only reason that's okay, it's never virtuous, but it's okay, is because in aggregate, because of something called the invisible hand, we're all better off. I don't really care that you're all better off. I want to pursue my life. Now, it happens that if we all pursue our own lives rationally, we're all better off, but that's not the point in morality. The point in morality should be each one of us should be pursuing our own life and our own happiness and to live the best damn life we can on the short time that we're on this planet. You can tell I'm getting older. It's a short time.
Well, on that, I think it's a perfect time to open up to the audience. I'm sure there's quite a lot of questions. So we have a roaming mic going around. All I would ask is you just raise your hands and I will point to you, and then try and keep your questions short just so we can get through as many as possible. So I think we've got one up the front here. There is one in the front row, Paratosh.
Thank you. So, I was recently speaking to someone who described themselves as an objectivist, but they had the interesting view that it was in their self-rational interest to have a welfare state. Their argument was that when you have some form of welfare state, it reduces crime. And by reducing crime, that is in their self-rational interest because it makes them safer. You obviously fiercely oppose a welfare state, as you've discussed many a times in your works. What would your response be that it's in our self-rational interest to have a minimal welfare state to keep us safe?
I've got a better way of keeping us safe. Almost all crime is committed by men, and most of it is committed between 6 p.m. and 7 a.m. How about a curfew? All men should be stay at home, and that will reduce crime dramatically, much more than the welfare state. So, no, I mean, reducing crime is not the aim. The aim is individual liberty, individual freedom. And the welfare state violates that aim on two levels. One, it takes my money and without asking me, allocates it to whatever group of people the politicians decide are the ones deserving, this week, right? And then I think it penalizes the people receiving the money because it tells the people receiving the money, you're worthless. You cannot take care of yourself. You cannot get a job and earn your living. You are dependent on the state. We are the only ones who can keep you alive. Now, what does that do to self-esteem of somebody who receives welfare? It destroys it. A friend of mine, his grandfather, they were very poor. His grandfather was a bricklayer. But his grandfather had immense pride in the fact that he went to work every day, he laid bricks, he got paid, and he put food on the table of his family. And he was proud of that. What pride do you get from a welfare recipient? None. And without pride, without self-esteem, you can't have a life. So the welfare state is destructive towards everybody involved. And the standard cannot be reducing crime. That would be in, what's his name? In El Salvador has figured this out, right? You arrest basically half the male population and crime goes down. I mean, murder rates in El Salvador has plummeted because you arrested anybody with a tattoo. And that is anti-freedom. That is anti-individualism. That's anti-my self-interest. My self-interest is to interact with free people. And I believe that under freedom, you actually get much lower crime rate than under welfare state. People have self-esteem.
Okay. So I think we have one over in the back there. Back row. Yeah.
Hello, Matthew, IA staff. It seems that on the libertarian right in the last few years, we've had a big intellectual shift on the issue of immigration. So many people who would call themselves libertarians used to defend open borders as something that maximizes GDP, gives people more freedom. And now there are very few who I think would publicly defend that position on the grounds of allowing people in from countries that have different value systems may lead to a situation where you don't have support for a minimalist state, among other things. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on this issue.
On why libertarians have changed their mind, or what my views are on immigration?
So why they've changed their mind, and whether you think their take is right or not.
So, I've seen a massive shift over the last 10 years or so among libertarians in the United States, and I don't know if this is true in the rest of Europe. I suspect it is. But it's not just immigration. It's a kind of form of nationalism more broadly, and it affects a number of different issues that relate to that. And it's interesting because it's happening primarily to the anarchist libertarians. That is, the anarchists who don't believe in any government and any borders are anti-immigration, which boggles the mind. But I really think it's because they lack real principles. They lack a philosophical underpinning for their beliefs in markets. And they have, over the last 10 years, been swayed by what you'd call the alt-right, the racist right. There are a lot of libertarian in the United States who are really racists. So they've adopted a collectivistic view of the world. And while they hold some free market ideas, they wrap that up in a collectivistic view of the world, in exact opposite of the kind of morality I've talked about, and they advocate for it. I mean, there is some, you could make an argument in Europe. You can make an anti-immigration argument in Europe, and I'll address that in a second. There is no anti-immigration argument in the United States. There's just no factual basis for it on a theoretical ground. Either we have individual rights, which include the right to move, and rights don't start and end at a border. We don't, right? And I thought we believed in individual rights. I certainly do. So there's no argument really against. Now, Milton Friedman said you can't have a welfare state and open immigration. Okay, let's get rid of the welfare state. I'm cool with that, but I'm still pro-immigration. And, okay, so we're not going to have open borders, but let's maximize immigration. That would be a good policy. Anybody who is not going to be on a welfare, like if you can get a job, you should be allowed in. That would be my immigration policy, certainly in the U.S. I have no idea how you could justify on a individualistic perspective, rational individualist perspective, any kind of other view. But I don't think they're individualists. I think they are libertarian collectivists. And one of the reasons I don't like calling myself a libertarian, and I never have, is because libertarianism is a big tent of all kinds of people, many of whom I view as my opposition, not my friends, because they have collectivistic views, because they could be racist, because they could be anarchists, who I think anarchism I think is anti-liberty. For a variety of reasons, I don't like these big tents. I might vote for classical liberal because I think that keeps out some of the crazies. But it's also a big tent. But I'm an objectivist. I prefer individualist or capitalist to libertarian because of that. Now, my view is Europe is a little different because I think there is a unique problem with Islamic immigration. And it's a unique problem with Islamic, and I know, I don't know if the police are going to come and arrest me, but so I need to be careful, I guess. But there is a unique problem with Islamic immigration. And the problem of Islamic immigration is us, not them. I mean, they have a problem, but it's our attitude. And that has two components. One is that we refuse to recognize those among them as violent, an enemy that needs to be defeated. I've been talking about this since 9/11. A lot of libertarians hate my guts because of this, but they need to be defeated. And until they're defeated, they are the enemy. And there's a war going on. And you don't invite the enemy in when there's a war going on. So, declare war, close the borders, win the war, open the borders. That's my view. And then the other is a sense in which it's our fault is we've, particularly in Europe, less so in America, we don't assimilate. We don't demand assimilation. We don't expect assimilation. If we were willing to say Western civilization is the best civilization ever, the cultures from which you come are barbaric and primitive, they're no good. It's one of the reasons you're coming here.
But isn't there freedom to do what they want to do there? Aren't you imposing your will on them?
Sure. And if they were not, I'm not imposing my will on them. I'm saying we should say, this is the best culture. And when you're living here, we expect of you, we're not going to coerce you, but we expect you to certainly abide by the rule of law. And if not, you go to jail like everybody else does. And we don't treat them the same. But also culturally, we expect you to to assimilate. You came here, we expect you to be part of this superior culture. It is a superior culture, even if you think it isn't.
It doesn't sound libertarian.
I'm not a libertarian, as I said. I'm not an egalitarian in any form. I believe that this culture is better than any other culture. So why not say it?
No, but I don't agree with the other folks.
Yes, I know you don't agree with that one. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm Sheldon Wilkie. I just want to touch on the point of assimilation, because in this country, we use the word integration and assimilation interchangeably, and they have two different meanings. And I think there needs to be some sort of clarity. I've spoken to people about assimilation, but they say that it's very much the state enforcing it. And I read that book by Heinz Henke, what was it, Out of the Melting Pot into the Fire. And he spoke about assimilation. Anyway, do you think that there is a big difference between integration?
Probably. And look, I don't want to turn this all into a discussion of immigration. I know it's a hot topic, but I think that what needs to happen is assimilation. I think that those of us, particularly those in educational institutions, should demand it, not by force, but through intellectual firepower. Should talk about it. We should all talk about it, about the value of the West and why coming here, you should embrace the values of the West. It's good for you. It's in your self-interest to do so. I think we should be proud of the civilization we live in and we support and we build on. And I do think it's assimilation. It's them accepting the civilization. It's great if they take the best elements in their cultures and contribute those elements to this melting pot, but they have to be the best. And we have to acknowledge that some of what they bring is the worst. And we have to recognize that and tell them, having your women walk around covering their entire bodies and their faces is not acceptable. And I don't think the state should say you can't do it. Personal freedom, right? But I think we as a culture should say it's not acceptable. This is not a way in which you behave. This is not a way in which you treat women. And I think the cultural pressure, by the way, the biggest thing we could do is get them to work, get them to the workplace. The reason America's better at assimilating is because in America, they have to work. And we have a smaller welfare state. Work is the best cultural absorber of any form. You go to work, you have to learn the language, you interact with other people, you discover what they're about, who they are. So work is the great assimilator in America. Our educational systems, unfortunately, do the opposite. And that's the challenge. So again, I don't see the state having any role. The state should back off. And ultimately, I'd like to see every country have an open borders completely. You have an individual right to travel, but I think there is a problem with Islam because of the section within it is interested in violence and interested in true control over the rest of the world.
We'll go here down the front. We'll just wait for the microphone just so you come through. Yeah.
Hello, Tim Lord. May I ask just two questions, if I may? One is, can you be a Christian or a, dare I say, Judeo-Christian and a capitalist? That's the first question. And secondly, would it be okay if a market tends to a monopoly and can then take advantage of all the consumers? Would that be something you would just allow it to happen? And how does that work with the interest of all the people who are now sort of not really so interested in what they're sort of able to buy?
Yeah. So with regard to Christianity or the religion more broadly, can you be that and be a philosophical defender of capitalism? I think you're really challenged. I think it's really, really difficult. Now, I'm not going to tell you you can't. That's up to you, right? Your problem, not mine. But it's really challenging because Christianity is a religion based on a particular moral view, a morality of sacrifice.
So the church is right. So the church in this country would preaches regularly the evils of the free market, which I go to church to put it to juice. So I spend every Sunday, every other Sunday, they're a big sort of hectic, pulpit. Yeah. And I don't accept that for reasons
But I think they're more consistent with the Sermon on the Mount than you are. That is, I think the Sermon on the Mount is in spite of what Jordan Peterson and others will say, and most Christians around the world are socialists. And it makes sense because it's a philosophy that preaches sacrifice. It's a philosophy that preaches the negation of self for the sake of the other. And now, so yes, I think it's a real challenge, particularly with Christianity.
What about the monopoly point?
So, the monopoly point is it just doesn't happen. And it won't happen, and it can't happen. So every monopoly, so-called monopoly that's ever existed, has not behaved that way, which is stunning, right? So Rockefeller had 93% of all the oil refining capacity in the United States in the 1870s. Prices went down every year. Quality went up every year. Because if the market is truly free, he knew competitors will arise. If he raised prices, if he treated customers badly, he would get competition like that. And indeed, who competed it out of his, what was he selling in 1870s? Oil for what? For kerosene. Who competed him out of business? Edison. Now, by that time, oil was so cheap that they figured out lots of other uses for it, which was one of the reasons he did it. But I've studied the history of business from the 19th century and the 20th century. And for very brief periods of time, you can get a company abusing its, market power. It doesn't last long because competitors will immediately jump in and wipe them out. So, cartels are formed and people cheat, always. Every cartel that's ever been formed, people cheat or people find ways around it. You know what Dow from Dow Chemical, now we know Dow Chemical, there was a cartel of German chemical companies and they wanted to wipe him out. They wanted to drive him out of business. So they raised prices, they lowered prices in the United States below the cost of production, below his costs. And of course, as a consequence, in order to continue to make a profit, right, they raised prices in Europe, right? So what did Dow do? In an era of no tariffs, what did Dow do? He bought the German product in the United States, shipped it to Germany, and undercut them with their own product in Germany until the cartel had to fall apart. So it just doesn't work. If you actually study the way markets work, they just don't allow for the kind of monopolistic behavior that we're taught in Economics 101. Because we're taught this model of perfect competition, which is a platonic, I was going to say ideal, but it's not ideal. It's a platonic nightmare. It's a platonic hell where there's no innovation. All companies are the same. They all charge the same amount and there's no profits, unrelated to reality. And then a monopolist who aggregates all of them suddenly can create these excess returns. But all good companies create excess returns, right? There's no perfect market out there. So does Apple have a monopoly? No, right? Because it only has like 50% of the world, But there's a sense in which it does. Now, put aside the word monopoly. There's a sense in which it has enormous market power over one thing. What's that? Apple, the brand. So does it produce excess returns because we like Apple? Yeah, its profit margins in these phones, in spite of competition, is something like 30-40%, which is very high, particularly versus the model of perfect competition. But it can do that not because it doesn't face competition, not because it treats the customers badly, but because it's treated us so well that we're willing to pay a little premium in order to keep them profitable, so they can keep innovating, so we can keep benefiting from them. So the whole mythology of monopolies is just it's a mythology. It's just not reality.
I think we've got one. We'll go over here, and then we'll go over there, and then there might be time, so just over there.
I think she's been ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we'll try and go here.
Tom, there are lots of examples of companies, industries that do kill their customers. Let's just take tobacco. Now, I dare say there are a few smokers here, but far fewer than 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And yet knowledge of the ill effects on health was known in the 1930s.
Yeah.
And the tobacco industry carried on producing products that it knew would kill its clients. Now, it could do this because it wasn't obvious. It wasn't like an elevator falling down, suddenly killing. So I'm curious to know where, in the Ayn Rand view of the world, one would place a regulatory curb on that sort of behavior, if at all. Because just as an aside, I understand that other than penicillin, it's been the cessation of tobacco smoking that's been the biggest single cause of increased life expectancy in the West.
So I don't think tobacco kills. I think people who smoke commit suicide. So the knowledge that tobacco is harmful was, as you said, available 30 years. I remember when a grandfather in his 70s quit smoking, right? He'd smoke a lot. He quit smoking because he suddenly discovered the knowledge that tobacco was, if he continued to smoke, it would kill him. So he quit smoking. So who's responsible for smoking? People who smoke. So I don't consider, the manufacturing of tobacco, once you know it's a harmful product, to be particularly virtuous. It's not the best in businessmen that comes out when they do that. But the reality is that the people responsible for it are the people who continue to use the product, particularly when the knowledge is out there. And the knowledge has been out there for a long, long, long time. And I still see people smoking, and I didn't get it when I was a teenager and everybody around me was smoking and I didn't smoke. And I don't get it now. So personal responsibility, teach people to be self-interested, teach people to be selfish, then they won't smoke.
Is there a duty on the state to
No.
the consumer that it's dangerous and then leave it to them to make the choice?
No, that's...
So how else does the message get to the consumer that it's dangerous?
All the cases that I know from the 1970s where it got to the consumer were their doctor told them. It's the duty of the doctor to tell them. And we should all have a good doctor. Again, personal responsibility. We should have a relationship with the doctor, preferably a private doctor, not one from the NHS. And that doctor is responsible for our health. That's part of the relationship. And he should be advising us about behaviors that are destructive. I mean, we do a lot of things that are destructive. I mean, if Americans drove less fast, there would be fewer accidents and fewer people would die on the road. Thousands of people die in car accidents that are easily preventable. There are lots of behaviors that we engage in that you could call suicidal. It's our personal responsibility, personal duty to ourselves to stop doing that. Now, if I were in the business of tobacco and I realized that my product was harmful to people, I would stop. I would quit. I would go do something else. So I'm not justifying the people who did it, but it's not the government's responsibility. It's not their responsibility. I mean, I believe that all drugs should be legal. Heroin, cocaine, fentanyl should all be legal. And let the market sort it out and let individuals decide whether they want to consume those products or not. It's not the job of the government to protect me. I mean, there was a prohibition once. We didn't allow people to drink alcohol. If people stopped drinking, they'd probably live longer lives. Alcohol probably shaves a few years off of your life, particularly the way you Brits drink. It does. I mean, there's a mythology about red wine is good for you. No, it's not. It really isn't. Alcohol, particularly to the mind, it has an effect of over time. So what are we going to ban alcohol? Now you say, of course not alcohol. But what about my cigarette? I like to smoke. I'm willing to take a few years off of my life in order to smoke. Personal choices, individual responsibility, self-interest, rational self-interest.
Okay, we said there was a woman over here. Yeah.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. I was wondering what you think about the concept of equality of opportunity and whether it's compatible with capitalism and morality, however you want to define it.
Yeah. I think equality of opportunity is a cop-out that the conservatives invented in order to appear different than the socialists, but they're not really. So what does equality of opportunity mean? Opportunity is an outcome. It's a different kind of outcome, but it's still an outcome, right? So I worked really hard, made some money to give my kids a lot of opportunities. Other parents didn't. How are we going to equate the opportunities? What are we going to do to equate the opportunities my kids had versus the kids of some other parents who didn't invest that much in them? You have to take opportunities away from my kids. How is that right and how is that just? Any more than equality of outcome, right? Some people make a lot of money, some people don't make a lot of money. Different equality. How do we fix that? We take money from them and give it to them. Same thing with opportunities. So no, I'm against equality of opportunities. I'm for maximizing opportunities. I want everybody to have as many opportunities as possible. And that is what freedom is about. Freedom maximizes opportunities. It maximizes for poor kids, maximizes for rich kids, and maximizes for everybody in between. They're never going to be equal. There's no such thing as equality. The only form of equality only means something when applied to human beings when we talk about political equality, when we talk about equality before the law, when we talk about equality of rights. But in terms of outcomes, an opportunity is an outcome. There's no such thing as equality. And when we try to achieve equality, we tend to do horrible things to people on the path towards equality. And it's never achieved. because it cannot be. It's metaphysically impossible.
Well, unfortunately, I do think we're going to have to bring this to an end just because I'm a bit conscious of the time, but we're going to be hanging around after, so you can continue to ask him more questions. So if you enjoyed tonight's event and would like to keep updated with the IEA, then you can sign up to our Substack at insider.iea.org.uk, where you can get first access to our events and research publications. But thank you, Yaron. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure that the comment section on this video is going to go mental. So yeah, let's give it up for Yaron again. Thank you.